I truly believe that grief is sacred work, and it's something that in our world is unavoidable. Every single person is going to have to go through the experience of grief, and we all do it so differently. A lot of us might be really familiar with Kubler-Ross's process of grief. She was a psychologist who developed this process that a lot of us know. It starts with denial, then anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Later on, she came back and she added a few more items to that list, two more. She added shock at the very beginning and then testing right before acceptance. What is really important for us to be able to recognize about Kubler-Ross's model is that it only applies to certain individuals in certain circumstances. She was studying those in the process of dying. She was looking at patients in hospitals and hospice, and it was her way of giving language to the death adjustment process, how we as human beings accept that we are dying. And so for a lot of us, may have had experiences where we were trying to force this model of grief upon ourselves, and it doesn't work that way. We all grieve in such unique ways. And the only way to grieve incorrectly is to not do it. Okay, so we don't have Kubler-Ross's process to grieve. We can't force ourselves into a state where we're in denial and then we're angry about it and then we're bargaining and so on. Then what are we supposed to do? There was a gentleman, a psychologist named William Worden, who created the concept of the tasks of grief. And I think it's actually a really helpful framework because it takes a lot of the pressure off while still giving some guidance on the ways that are helpful for us to go through the process of grief. It isn't a task where we just cross off the box and we say, okay, we're done with that task of grieving. We don't have to do it anymore. In fact, we might come back and do it several times, or we might spend years in one of those tasks, and then the others come in a matter of days. The first one is to accept the reality of the loss, and not just to ideologically say, oh yeah, I know that I no longer have this person with me, or I know that I no longer have this opportunity, but to accept it with your whole being, to accept it on every level of who you are, that this loss has occurred. And this might be using different kinds of language, maybe with tenses, where it is, my mom and I have so much fun when we do this. It becomes, my mom and I had so much fun when we do this. Now, this is an important part because it's the framework for the rest of it. We can't move forward. We're not getting over it. That's a really important thing to note. None of this is trying to make you get over. There are so many different things that people say in the midst of grief that is ridiculously unhelpful. It is painful and hard, and most of the time it's well-intentioned, but it comes across so inappropriately. This idea that we're supposed to get over the loss of someone, I don't think we ever actually do. I think it's more like how a tree grows, and we can see in the rings of the tree when certain events happened. They're marked on the tree forever and ever, and that's how grief impacts us. It doesn't go away, but it's something that we can grow from. It's something that we can grow around. And so accepting the reality that we have experienced this loss and accepting it with our whole being is an essential part, an essential task of being able to grieve healthily. The second task, which I think is so hard, so hard, is to process the pain of the grief, to feel the feelings, and not just in a tertiary way, but with our whole being, to feel the waves of grief. And I use waves specifically because I think it often comes at us in waves, where we can be doing fine for a couple days maybe, and then it hits us, and it's almost impossible to keep our heads above water. One important thing for us to be able to keep in mind is that that's normal. It's not necessarily right. It's not the way we wish it could be. It's not wonderful, but it is very, very normal. Oftentimes we see grief as this big monster that's out to get us and devour us. And in reality, Grief is more often like a big blue dog that greets us at the door and wants our attention. It's not malicious or trying to do something, but it might be big enough that it knocks us over accidentally. And as soon as we allow ourselves to give that dog attention, to spend time in the midst of our grief, that's when the dog settles in, and it might go to the corner for the rest of the afternoon, satisfied that you spent time with it for just a little bit. Or maybe it needs more from you. And the best thing we can do is to find ways to give it that attention. What you're communicating to that big blue dog is, I see you, I hear you, I'm gonna be with you, and I'm gonna honor the space that we have together. Again, this idea of sacred work, recognizing that it's not something we can just bulldoze through. The third task is to adjust to a new world without the deceased. I like to use the language of accepting the reality of a new world. It is a new universe that you step into after a loss because it doesn't have that person. And so finding ways to adjust to that new world without the deceased is so important. And this looks like focusing on some of our functioning. Am I able to get up out of bed today? Maybe they were somebody that was really important to your day-to-day life. Maybe they were the one who always made the coffee for you. And now you need to find some way to have coffee in the morning because that person isn't there to make it for you. This might be learning new skills to be able to do the things that you depended on that other person for. It might be developing new skills for you to be able to work through what's happening and to find a way to be in that reality. The final task, task 4, is to find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. Now, what this task is saying, I like to put it in a metaphor that's maybe a little gross. Imagine our hearts in our chests, and we have these invisible veins that come out from us to others, and they connect. We attach. This is what humans do. We attach to things and people and pets. And now imagine that person or pet or thing disappears and that cord is severed. Now we have this vein dangling out of our hearts and it's bleeding and it hurts and it's making things messy. And I think it's just an example or a picture of how grief feels sometimes. And what task 4 is talking about is finding some way to continue to keep that attachment to that person, an enduring connection in a new reality. And so here's an example of what this could look like. I had a client once who had lost a friend, and before this friend had died, they had started adapting this new process. They were sending out meaningful cards written out to their friends around their birthdays, and just saying what role they played in their lives. And so when this client experienced the loss of this friend, one of the ways that they were able to continue to have that enduring connection was they started to give cards and send cards in the mail to friends around their birthdays. She didn't say in the letters, my friend used to do this, so this is why I'm doing it. But in her heart, she knew, I'm doing this practice because it's a way for me to keep this attachment alive, to keep a connection to my friend. This is where there's some real art to grief and some real ways to honor the person that we've lost. The last thing I do want to say in this video about grief is for the people around individuals who are grieving. This is such a painful time, and I think sometimes it can be really easy for us to back away or to offer some help and support at the beginning and then disappear, thinking it's okay. They'll manage. They've got a lot of support. I would highly encourage you to reach out. A lot of the support you think is there really is never there. Being able to reach out to somebody who's grieving and not solve it, not fix it, because you can't, they can't. It's a process, it's working through it, not going to them and saying, hey, you need to go through these tasks, but instead going to them and saying, hey, I'm so sorry, and I'm here for you. And just being there for them can be some of the most meaningful ways to support somebody in the midst of grief. Sometimes saying less is more, and absolutely just being present is sometimes enough. One other thing is oftentimes we ask the unhelpful question, how can I help you? We don't have answers for that when we're in the midst of grief and loss. And so instead, offering ideas. Hey, can I bring dinner tonight? Or, hey, can I watch the pet or the kids? Or can I take over this thing for you? And allowing them to say no, and then following up later. Don't give up. It doesn't go away quickly. It might, but it normally doesn't. And we shouldn't expect them to just be able to bounce back to newness and okayness. Sitting with people in the midst of it, allowing them the space and the encouragement and the support to be able to work through the tasks of grief is so, so meaningful. So approach people with compassion and grace. And if you are the one who's grieving, I would so, so encourage you to reach out to a counselor who can share space with you in the midst of that grief, who you can share that loss with, and can hold that space with you.